The snow fell steadily on the empty train platform as 28-year-old Emma Carter sat on the cold metal bench, her blue nurse uniform providing little protection against the bitter winter wind. She had been waiting for over 2 hours for a train that had been delayed indefinitely due to the storm, and her thin jacket was no match for the freezing temperatures that seemed to cut straight through to her bones. Emma had just finished a grueling 16-hour shift at Metropolitan General Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. The job she loved barely paid enough to cover her tiny studio apartment, and tonight she faced the devastating reality that her landlord had changed the locks while she was at work. 3 months of unpaid rent had finally caught up with her, and all her belongings were now sitting in boxes on the sidewalk, probably buried under snow. As Emma shivered on the platform, clutching her small purse and wondering where she would sleep tonight, she heard the sound of expensive leather shoes approaching through the snow. She looked up to see a man in an elegant black coat walking toward her, accompanied by a little girl bundled up in a bright red winter coat and matching knitted hat. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s with the kind of confident bearing that spoke of success and authority. But there was something in his expression as he looked at Emma that suggested compassion rather than judgment. The little girl beside him clutched a small teddy bear and watched Emma with the curious, empathetic eyes that children often bring to encounters with people who are struggling. "Excuse me," the man said gently, approaching Emma with obvious concern. "I am Alexander Winters, and this is my daughter, Sophie. We were waiting for our car when I noticed you have been sitting here for quite some time. Are you all right?" Emma looked up at this well-dressed stranger and his daughter, feeling embarrassed by her obvious circumstances, but touched by their genuine concern. "I am Emma," she replied, her voice barely steady due to both the cold and her emotional exhaustion. "I am waiting for a train, but it seems to be delayed indefinitely." Alexander studied Emma's face, taking in the exhaustion in her eyes and the way she was shivering despite her attempts to appear composed. "Emma, forgive me if this sounds presumptuous, but you look like someone who has had a very difficult day. Is there anything we can do to help?" At that moment, Sophie tugged on her father's coat and whispered something in his ear. Alexander nodded and knelt down to his daughter's level for a brief, quiet conversation that Emma could not hear but could see was serious and important. When Alexander stood up, his expression had changed to one of careful consideration. "Emma, I know this might sound unusual, but Sophie and I would like to make you an offer. Would you be willing to have a warm meal with us while we talk about something that might benefit all of us?" Emma hesitated, her natural caution warring, with her desperate need for warmth and the genuine kindness she sensed from both father and daughter. "That is very generous, Mr. Winters, but I do not want to impose on your evening." Sophie stepped forward and looked up at Emma with the kind of direct honesty that only children possess. "Please come with us, Miss Emma. Daddy says you are cold and sad, and we do not like it when people are cold and sad." 20 minutes later, Emma found herself in an elegant restaurant, wrapped in Alexander's warm coat, and holding a cup of hot soup that was gradually bringing feeling back to her frozen hands. Sophie sat beside her, sharing stories about her favorite nurses at the hospital where she had been treated for asthma, and slowly Emma began to relax in the warmth and safety of their company. "Emma," Alexander said carefully, "I hope you will not think I am being intrusive, but you mentioned you are a nurse, and you seem to be facing some kind of difficult situation tonight." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as the stress of her circumstances finally overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. "I lost my apartment today," she admitted quietly. "I have been working extra shifts to try to catch up on my rent, but it was not enough. I do not have anywhere to go tonight." Alexander and Sophie exchanged glances, and Emma could see some kind of silent communication passing between them. "Emma," Alexander said gently, "what I am about to suggest might sound completely unconventional, but I hope you will hear me out." Emma nodded, curious despite her exhaustion. "Sophie and I live in a large house that has far more space than two people need," Alexander continued. "I am a single father who travels frequently for business, and I have been struggling to find reliable, caring childcare for Sophie. She needs someone who understands children and can provide the kind of nurturing presence that I want her to have when I am away." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy works very hard, but sometimes he has to go to other cities, and I stay with babysitters who do not really know me." Alexander leaned forward slightly. "Emma, you need a home, and I need someone I can trust to care for my daughter. What if we could help each other? You could live in our guest suite, have your own space and privacy, but be available to care for Sophie when my work requires me to travel. In return, you would have a place to live and a salary that would allow you to continue your nursing career without the financial stress you are currently facing." Emma stared at them both, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Mr. Winters, that is incredibly generous, but you do not know anything about me. How can you trust a stranger with your daughter?" Alexander smiled, glancing at Sophie, who was nodding encouragingly. "Emma, I have spent the last hour watching how you interact with Sophie, how you listen to her stories, how you respond to her questions. I can see that you have the kind of natural warmth and patience that comes from genuinely caring about children. Plus, your work as a pediatric nurse tells me you have the skills and background to provide excellent care." Sophie reached over and took Emma's hand. "Miss Emma, I think you would be a wonderful person to have in our family. You have kind eyes, and you make me feel safe." Emma felt overwhelmed by the generosity and trust these virtual strangers were offering her. "I do not know what to say. This seems too good to be true." "Say you will consider it," Alexander replied. "Why do not you come home with us tonight? See the house and the room that would be yours, and take some time to think about whether this arrangement would work for all of us." 6 months later, Emma stood in the kitchen of the Winters home, preparing breakfast for Sophie and watching through the window as the little girl played in the backyard garden they had planted together. What had begun as a desperate arrangement between strangers had evolved into something that felt remarkably like a real family. Emma had discovered that Alexander was not just a successful businessman, but a devoted father who genuinely cared about providing Sophie with stability and love. Her role had naturally expanded beyond childcare to include managing the household and creating the kind of warm, nurturing environment that both Alexander and Sophie had been missing. Alexander had found in Emma not just a reliable caregiver for Sophie, but a partner in creating a home filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of daily rituals that make a house feel like a sanctuary. Emma's nursing background had proven invaluable during Sophie's occasional asthma episodes, and her natural empathy had helped Sophie blossom emotionally. "Emma," Alexander said as he joined her in the kitchen, adjusting his tie before leaving. "For a business meeting, I have something I want to discuss with you." Emma looked up from Sophie's lunch preparation, noting something serious in Alexander's expression. "This arrangement has worked out better than I ever hoped," Alexander continued. "Sophie adores you, and you have brought a stability and happiness to our lives that I did not realize we were missing." Emma felt her heart skip, wondering if Alexander was about to tell her that the arrangement needed to change somehow. "What I want to ask," Alexander said, taking her hands gently, "is whether you would consider making this permanent in a different way. Emma, I have fallen in love with you, not just as Sophie's caregiver, but as the woman who has made our house a home." Emma felt tears of joy spring to her eyes as she realized that her feelings for Alexander had grown far beyond gratitude into something deep and lasting. "Sophie and I have talked about this extensively," Alexander continued with a smile, "and she is very much in favor of asking you to become not just part of our family, but the center of it." At that moment, Sophie burst through the kitchen door, clearly having been listening from the hallway. "Miss Emma, will you marry Daddy and be my real mommy? I have been hoping for this for months." Emma laughed through her tears, looking at this little girl who had become the daughter of her heart, and the man who had shown her that sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. "Yes," Emma said, embracing both of them. "I would be honored to be your real family." 1 year later, at their wedding in the garden where Emma and Sophie had planted flowers together, Alexander spoke about how that snowy night at the train station had changed all their lives. "A year ago, I thought I was offering Emma a practical arrangement that would solve problems for both of us," Alexander said in his wedding speech. "What I discovered was that when you open your home to someone in need, you often find that they were exactly what your heart was missing." Emma, radiant in her wedding dress with Sophie beside her as maid of honor, reflected on how a night that had seemed like the lowest point of her life had actually been the beginning of everything she had ever dreamed of. Sometimes, Emma thought, as she looked out at their friends and family celebrating their love, the most beautiful proposals are not for marriage, but for the chance to build a life together. And sometimes, when two people are brave enough to trust each other with their greatest needs, they discover that they can create something more wonderful than either could have imagined alone. The homeless nurse and the lonely CEO had found in each other not just practical solutions to their problems, but the missing pieces that made them whole.